All right, folks, how you doing? Welcome back. So this is the Silurian Wars with Rome, Part 3. Disclaimer, under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Once again, we're going into the Great Deception, the Treaty of Union. So Agamemnon himself, exactly like Sesostris or King Arthur, and for the same reason, namely the betrayal of his queen by his trusted regent, prematurely returned home only to be slain. Pyrrhus, however, did reach the Epirus, not so great a journey from Cuxhaven to the Forth, and yet the son of Achilles made no apparent effort to return to his own possessions in Achaea, situated though it was at the mouth of the Peneus Lachlan, not far distant, was the reason that his patrimony had been totally destroyed owing to the devastation caused by the path of the comet. The antiquity of Stirling Castle is unknown. It ranks with Dumbarton and Edinburgh as one of the three historic and venerable sites which, under the Treaty of Union, must be maintained by a garrison, occupied by the Romans. So it stands on the summit of an isolated, steep intrusion of basalt, 340 feet above the Forth, and was almost impregnable in past times. Here was the Parliament House, the Royal Palace, the Chapel Royal, now military storerooms, with its powerful defences frowning on the town below and the wide countryside around. It commands the ancient highway from the lowlands to the highlands, so that all traffic passed under its walls, making it a fortress of the utmost strategic importance. During the Roman period especially, its walls were greatly extended, and the highway was crossed from east to west by an ancient road between the old Palmaise and Dumbarton. The castle was occupied by the Romans, for on the face of the rock below the citadel was found a Latin inscription which stated that the Second Legion had built a fort there. The Second Legion. So the Second Legion was associated with Vespasian and was long connected with this part of Scotland. Such then relates to Troy Novantum. Evidence is forthcoming from antiquarian, archaeological, classic, and traditional sources, supported by place names. Such cannot be ignored, and we therefore see that the original Alba or Albion lay between the Brindlebean Mountains and the Solway Firth, embracing, generally speaking, the territories from the northern border of Perthshire to Cumberland in England, with the exception of Argyllshire and Dumbartonshire, and further south, the eastern lowlands between Lanark and Dumfries. A daughter of Britain. These Brigantes or Albanians proved their descent from Troy and were justified in claiming that Rome herself is really a daughter of Britain, founded more than 500 years after the first settlers from Phrygia and Troy had arrived. When they went to Italy, they took a number of British names with them, such as Rhegium in Italy's toe, Umbria, the Humber, Apennines, the Pennines, but they could not transport the underworld Scylla and Charybdis, marine dangers which terrified sailors on either side of the narrow strait between Kintyre and Ireland opposite, for the placid Strait of Messina is a ludicrous claim. Thucydides, in describing the dangers of the channel between Rhegium and Trinacria, where lay Scylla and Charybdis, says, quote, the narrowness of the passage and the strength of the current that pours in from the vast Tyrrhenian and Sicilian mains have rightly given it a bad reputation. Thucydides, renowned for his careful description and his naval knowledge, could not possibly have been describing the Strait of Messina, Italy, for it would have been preposterous to apply such words to the placid, tideless channel between Italy and the present Sicily, where there are neither vast Tyrrhenian nor Sicilian main currents entering the strait. Strength of current is entirely foreign to its waters, nor are there any dangerous reefs off either coast to answer to Scylla and Charybdis, the North Channel of the Atlantic. So the Mediterranean here is practically tideless, and so its waters have augmented and not receded through the centuries, as proved by ancient ruins now partly drowned, and it yet remains placid. The story of Scylla and Charybdis must relate to a totally different region. The explanation is that Rhegium as shown clearly in this work, was originally Wigtonshire or Galloway in Scotland, and Ireland was originally Sicily, whose earliest inhabitants, as Thucydides says, were Cyclopes, and I have no idea how you say that, from Norway, on whose islands Minos made war, supposedly because Daedalus fled there from Knossos, but the probable reason was on account of their piratical habits, which interfered with the traffic of his ships trading with Gades and other parts of the south. Ireland had many names besides, including Libya, Meropes, etc., but as Sicily, it is best dealt with in my Appendix B, the quote, vast Tyrrhenian and Sicilian mains, of which Thucydides speaks, was the north channel of the Atlantic, which divides the Irish Sea, originally the Tyrrhenian Sea of Cumberland and Lancashire, the home of the Tyrrhene tribe, and the Sicilian between Fairhead, Ireland, and Cantyre or Kintyre, leading in from the Atlantic Ocean at both ends. Long before Rome was built, Rhegium was situated, as Wigtonshire is yet on the strait. In this channel, the murderous, sharp, basaltic rocks of Fairhead, County Antrim, and the Mull of Cantyre opposite, with Rathlin Island's great columnar cavernous cliffs just beyond. The adverse currents made these waters perilous indeed. That was a mouthful. Ptolemy's description of Britain. So ancient charts of the Venetians reveal that their ships preferred to sail around the entire Irish coast rather than risk Scylla and Charybdis in this channel, where Ulysses was traditionally shipwrecked and thrown on the shores of Ogygia, probably the Isle of Giga of Kintyre, or on the peninsula itself. Scylla and Charybdis were accounted as placed in the underworld, which had nothing to do with the Mediterranean region. If thus Thucydides were describing these seas between Britain and Ireland, it is obvious that in his day the Peloponnesian War among the Greek states took place before they emigrated, if in fact they ever did, other than a comparative few. In the same way that Egypt was a British colony in the south, so must have been such Greek settlements as took place later in those parts. At a later period, between AD 140 and 150, the Brigantes are included by Ptolemy in his description of Britain. Did I say Ptolemy? Ptolemy. Beg your pardon. Mispronounced that slightly. Forcibly ending the Jewish state. So by then, their realms extended much further south and included Yorkshire, with such places as Catterick, Cataractonium, Aldborough, Isurium, and York Eboracum. It is notable that this change seems to have come about at this period because in 136 the Emperor Hadrian had destroyed Jerusalem and driven the Jews away, thus forcibly ending the Jewish state. Their former territory is merely given the name of Gadini by Ptolemy, and he includes no mention of their capital. Does this mean that the Romans, now on friendly terms with the Brigantes, had allowed them to occupy part of what had been Jewish possessions? What is today Ayrshire? So we must now take stock of the Silures, because in their long struggles against the Romans, the Brigantes had almost invariably been their allies and supporters. They are most vital in realizing past history. Hector Boas, the old Scots historian, gives us one clue to their whereabouts when he claims that Catterick above Galloway was, quote, part of Siluria. Kyle, quote, called after Coil, king of the Britons, was Silurian, as also Cunningham was the third part and most noisome to the Romans. These three were in what is today Ayrshire, which throws a different outlook upon this people, always assumed to have been limited to Wales. The Emperor Claudius. So this romantic part of Britain, away from the areas of modern factories and the disintegrating hand of commerce, with its hills and dales and wild moorlands, haunted by the genius of Robert Burns, offered exceptional opportunities for guerrilla warfare. The report of Hector Boas, in view of garbled ideas regarding the Silures and their activities against the Romans, is of importance. It denotes how closely the Brigantes and Silures had been associated. We gather from fragmentary records of Tacitus and Dion Cassius, as also Suetonius, that in AD 45 Britain was in an uproar for harbouring refugees, suggesting that they were actively interfering in Britain's internal affairs. The Emperor Claudius decreed an expeditionary force, and with it went Vespasian, who commanded the Second Legion. Caractacus. It was under the main command of Plautius. Cunobelin, king of the Cassi, had lately died, and Plautius defeated first Caractacus and then Togodumnus, sons of Cunobelin, says Dion, whereas Caractacus was his nephew. Dion also states that Claudius led the troops and captured Camulodunum, but Suetonius, who wrote the life of Claudius, says he was in Britain only a few days. The important factor to be noted is that the terrain of the war and after with the Silures and Brigantes was almost entirely in the north, mainly around the Isthmus country, and not in the south at all. For nearly 9 years, Caractacus held the Roman forces at bay, inflicted many defeats on them, and the Silures were far from being vanquished. Julius Caesar's earlier invasion appears to have been in the same direction. So, coins of Cunobelin. Camulodunum was a fortress, but was not Cunobelin's capital, which was Trinovantum, the cause of the original dispute in the time of Cassi Bellon, his grandfather. So, whatever else Caesar effected in the north, the Cassi kings had held on to Trinovantum or Stirling until this time. According to Welsh records, Cunobelin reigned in Britain for 35 years. He was succeeded by his son Guiderius, the Togodumnus of Dion, who was killed in a battle against Claudius, in which Caractacus distinguished himself and took over command. Arviragus, the younger son of Cunobelin, subsequently succeeded Caractacus. Caractacus, or Caradoc, nephew of Cunobelin, was the son of Bran, brother of the Trinovantine king, who became archdruid of the College of Silures and Mona, or Anglesey, according to the Welsh accounts. The capture of Caractacus. So in 36, Bran resigned the Silurian crown to Caractacus, and on the death of Guiderius, although Arviragus should have been his brother Guiderius' successor, Caractacus was unanimously elected to the Pendragonate, or Supreme Military Command of the Northern Celts, a Scottish title for the Supreme Command, on which occasion Arviragus voted in his favour and served under him. Later, when Caractacus was defeated and taken prisoner in the Ordovices country, or Lancashire, the Silures elected Arviragus in his stead, and as Tacitus admits, quote, in Britain, after the capture of Caractacus, the Romans were repeatedly put to the rout by the single state of the Silures alone. Under the leadership of Arviragus, to whom the poet Spenser pays tribute, never king more highly, I don't know how to read that, nor dread of Romans was than Arvar. I don't know. You can read it for yourself. You can make sense of it, maybe. Hard to read that. St. Paul and Seneca. The facts that first Caractacus and then Arviragus were given the Pendragonate stamps the northern conduct of his war, for Pendragon was a military title mentioned in the Book of Iona, and records that Arthur was the son of Pendragon, what was the character of the Claudian invasion. We have evidence of Vespasian in Wiltshire about Stonehenge, and in the West Country about Bristol, yet we hear nothing of the northern or eastern parts. What inference may we draw from Seneca, who was the contemporary of Claudius, and who knew something about Britain, for an ancient manuscript in the Bodleian Library of Oxford is said to contain letters between St. Paul and Seneca relating to the apostles' residence in Siluria. Plautius. So I ask what reference because Seneca wrote these lines. It's in Latin. I can't read Latin. I'm sorry. Truly, we must grant poets their license, but unless Seneca implies that Claudius was enslaving the Britons in the north, quote, beyond the shores of the known sea, as well as his reference to the Brigantes in the north, his words are meaningless. Yet Claudius certainly did make such claims, declared that they had conquered the Orkneys, and on the strength of it named his son Britannicus. Plautius was succeeded by Ostorius. He had trouble with the Iceni, probably in Lincolnshire or Norfolk, and then marched against the Cangi or Kiangi in northern Wales, but they nearly opposite. But when nearly opposite the Hibernian Sea, he had to turn northwards to the Brigantes, where civil war had broken out. Okay, between the Forth and the Clyde, so more trouble lay in store. The restless Salures, whom, quote, neither harshness nor clemency could soften, as Tacitus observes, were becoming increasingly active and dangerous. It was then that Storius, so that he may be the more at liberty to erect forts amongst them for their repression, that the Roman colony at Camulodunum was formed with army veterans in that part of Britain already conquered, as a check to rebels there, and to keep the allies to their obligations. There are, or these are suggestive words when appreciated. Camulodunum, as will be proved without dispute a little later, lay in the region between the Forth and the Clyde, straddling the isthmus. Note Tacitus' claim that it had already been conquered. By whom and when? It was the region of the rebels. And who were they? The Silures, admittedly, but whom did they represent? The Ordovices country. Modern writers on this period, completely losing the wood for the trees, seek vainly in the wrong surroundings. Generally, Camulodunum is regarded as in Essex, confusing it with how do you say this? Camulodunum in the what? Confusing it with Camulodunum in the Antonine Iter, which some say was Colchester and others Saffron Walden. But what interest had the Silures hailing from the north in the region of Essex? Others attempt to locate it in Wales or nearby, as at Camerton in Somerset, but that fails completely to fit in with this situation of this tribe who were fighting in the north. Astorius, as we see, had put this colonia in the care of army veterans, his aims being primarily to control the Silures, as he only accomplished this purpose in 50 AD. In the intervening years, these people had been carrying on a successful guerrilla war. The colonia of Camulodunum became, in fact, the local point in subsequent warfare. Camulodunum has also been frequently confused with the capital of the Trinovantes because it was not far distant. In view of what has previously been advanced, in which Stirling has been identified with the original Trinovantum, with Camulodunum at Scottish Camelon near Falkirk. Historians have blundered badly in placing them in the region of Essex. For example, Caractacus, finally defeated in a battle against the Romans on Silurian soil, fled to the adjoining territory of the Ordovices, who also adjoined the Brigantes, and whose queen, how do you fucking say this? Cartis, I have no fucking idea how you read that. You can see it on the screen. I have no idea how you say that. Sold him to the enemy. The Ordovices country was the present Lancashire, where, according to Ptolemy, they had a fort or town called Branoginium. Okay, this first part here, maybe I misread it, but that is fucking confusing. Let me read that again. Modern writers on this period, completely losing the wood for the trees, seek vainly in the wrong surroundings. Generally, Camulodunum is regarded as an Essex, confusing it with Camulodunum in the Antonine Iter. How could you have possibly worded that more confusingly? What? I thought I'd misread it, like, the first time, and then I read it, I was like, "No, I didn't misread it, it's just badly written." These books need editors, they really, really do. Oh my goodness me. My kingdom for a fucking editor. Anyway, the Britannic War. Ravenous, whose, how do you say this? Chorographia, I think that's how you say it, of British towns was compiled early in the 6th century, places this fort near Magnus with others along the Antonine Wall from the Clyde to the Forth, which confirms the fact that the Ordovices dwelt in that region. Magnus has been identified along the Vallum as Bar Hill, a strong fortress in its day. All these traces take us to the Isthmus region. Caractacus, betrayed thus in the 9th year of the Britannic War, had performed many bold deeds which caused him to become preeminent, not only in his own country, but with the Romans. His long defiance captivated the minds of a people who lived under a stern dictatorship, and Claudius, exhibiting him, did I read that right? Yeah, exhibiting him and his family before the Romans in a triumphal procession, added to his own glory, which proves how greatly interested were the Romans in events affecting Britain. So there we go. That's the end of part 3. As always, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I'll see you for part number 4. Take care.